Fantastic. Hi, my name is Owen Henkel. I'm also a principal at Pearson Affordable Learning Fund. It's an internal investing fund at Pearson that invests in education startups in emerging markets, specifically ones that we think are increasing access to quality education. And I just want to give a shout out to one of our favorite investees, Spark Schools from South Africa, born and bred. So they're celebrating their 5th year anniversary. If you see them in the audience, say hi. They're doing great stuff. But what I'm actually here to talk about today is some research another one of our groups did, which is on the future of skills and work in 2030. And so this is kind of this fundamental question. These are basic jobs that we all take for granted, but we all know that they're definitely changing, and they might be gone in a couple of years. So how do we know what jobs to prepare our students for? And this was the impetus of the research. And there's a lot of research out there. A lot of it's actually pretty pessimistic. And while we acknowledge that the pace of technological change is just staggering, 10 years ago, experts in computer vision and robotics said we were decades away from autonomous vehicles, that 10 years from then, now, cars wouldn't even be able to make a left turn. And now there's multiple companies that can do cross-continental drives with limited to no human intervention. And so these things are changing so rapidly that we don't want to have too much hubris, but we also think that there's some things to be optimistic about. And most importantly, we want to be able to take an active role. We know this is changing, but what can we actually do about it? So this is our basic research process. It's 3-part. We started by doing a lot of literature review and looking at what we already know about labor market dynamics. And through that, we were able to identify kind of 30 core occupations that ourselves and experts know a lot about and have a pretty good idea about how they're going to change in the next 10 to 15 years. Then we coupled this with a panel of kind of premier experts and use all this information, this is the second step, to come up with a forecast of how these 30 jobs would operate over the next 15 years, whether they would increase or decrease in demand in the labor market. And the third step is we collaborated with researchers at Oxford University to put all this information together and kind of build an algorithmic model to project not just how those 30 jobs would perform, but about 750 other jobs that we had data on. And we have this in a few different countries, but the one I'm talking about today was in the United States because there's this very rich data set, the ONET labor statistics data set, that not only describes jobs, but even down to the skills that are associated with that job. So I think one thing that's really exciting about this research is it can actually tell you not just what jobs will change, but what skills become increasingly relevant. So let's just get to the high level of the research. I'm going to give you a second to digest this while I talk over it. There's a lot of information on this, I know, but it is kind of pretty, lots of fun colors. So as you can see, these colors are groups of occupations. So these aren't specific jobs. This is just a high-level view for this talk. And you see the center line is at 50% probability. So if you look at things that are kind of more to the left of that line in terms of the area under the graph, that means they're relatively less likely to be in demand in 2030. So that means they'll shrink effectively. The things that you see the majority of the area on the right side of the graph means that they're going to have increased demand. And so the big takeaways are this. If you use a threshold of about 3.3 or 0.7, which is what the research has deemed appropriate, about 20% of current jobs are forecast to be extremely likely to decline by 2030. And this sounds like a lot, and it is a lot, but this is also much lower than other forecasts. Another number that was floating around a couple years ago was about 50%, 47% was the number. Importantly, about 10% of jobs are forecast to expand. And this isn't new jobs. This is just literally jobs that exist today that there'll be more of. But as usually is the case when you try to tell the future, there's a lot of uncertainty. So in the middle, the rest of that, about 70%, are in between that 0.3 and that 0.7 threshold, which means there's a fair amount of uncertainty. But let's dig into what this looks like a little bit more. So this is a list of the 20 professions, and now this is more granular. This is kind of very specific jobs that we forecast to be extremely likely to increase. Some of these aren't that surprising. You see service sector jobs and the like. But one thing, especially given our conference, that I think is fascinating is how many of these jobs are education-related. I think there's like 5 or 6 on there. And so in a certain way, it makes a lot of sense that as the labor market is changing, as you need more and more skills, well, then, of course, education as a profession itself is going to become more in demand. I didn't have time, but we also have a list of the jobs that are most likely to shrink. Those are unsurprising ones, certain types of manual labor, kind of a very like rote process manufacturing. It's all in the complete report, or feel free to talk to me about it later. But I want to move on to what I think is the most interesting part of this research, and this is when you get down to specific skills. So this is basically looking at the jobs that were forecast to increase the most, and then saying what skills are associated with those jobs. Now, it might be a little bit difficult here, but I'm not sure if you guys can see it okay, but for those of you who've been talking about higher level thinking skills, higher level cognitive skills, 21st century skills, and the like, not too many of these will be surprising. There's a lot of kind of problem-solving skills, communication skills, interpersonal skills. But what is exciting is this gets very granular. You could almost teach some of this stuff because this database is so great. So learning strategies isn't something general. That's actually a set of very specific like self-regulatory, self-efficacy skills where people monitor their own learning process. And what's fascinating is that's number one. So it's actually like learning how to learn is going to be the most important skill moving forward. And there's some other really important ones, but stuff like active listening, speaking, those are quite important, but they're not quite as high up the list. So I think what's quite interesting here is you can actually, if you think about designing a curriculum, you can get very tangible. And I think at an earlier panel today on employability, a few of the speakers were saying some really interesting things about the need to get granular to meet labor market needs. A few other takeaways is that low-skill jobs, while some of them will disappear, they're also likely to evolve. Some jobs just go away, but other jobs evolve. And what's interesting is that by adding certain types of complementary skills to jobs that are at a high risk of going away, you can actually make them more durable, at least for a while. So I think if you look at the bottom, personal care and service occupations, some service occupations might go away. You can make them more attractive and more resilient by adding further emphasis on personal service, as well as adding technology design, which is a really kind of counterintuitive finding at first. But if you think about it, if you're doing personal service, it's kind of prototyping. It's a basic design processes. So that's how you could actually take jobs that might go away and upskill them within the existing job. Something that might be interesting for this audience also is that high status, high demand jobs are also going to change a lot too. So I'm not sure, but probably a lot of people in this room might see themselves on this chart, which is fine. But if you look at the right column, what's really interesting, you see science and operations analysis. And when I looked at that, I was really surprised at first because, of course, we're not going to expect everyone to be like a Six Sigma expert. But what this means is the underlying skills associated with that, kind of iterative problem solving, going through evidence, kind of being able to use data to solve problems, will become increasingly important across a range of high-skill jobs. So in short, we're all going to have to adapt and learn. And so when we talk about important next steps, the big takeaways, this is what we think this research says for the three big actors in the education ecosystem. So one, education systems, they need to adapt faster and they need to be more in touch with labor markets. I think everyone in this room would agree on that. We think also there's a lot of, that they need to be more flexible in terms of provide more flexible student pathways. So have different ways you can make your way through your educational journey. So that's for education systems. For employers, look beyond a college degree. There's lots of talks about skilling and stuff, but if you look at the research, a college degree is still unbeatable, just because of kind of that premium in a sense. And so actually, employers actually, hiring different types of folks. And also, I think sometimes when employers complain about, people don't have the skills we need coming out of college, sometimes they're not actually defining those skills on a very granular level. They'll say teamwork. Like, well, teamwork is 17 skills, so it's actually on employers to do a better job of saying specifically what they want out of employees. And finally, I think this applies to all of us, is for learners, it's really a total shift in the way you approach learning. It's about a commitment to lifelong learning. Students who are entering the education system now, they're going to have 10 to 12 jobs. It's not going to be, I'm going to get my degree and then I'm set. It's like, I get a degree to start my first job, and then I just keep on learning the rest of my life. And that can be really scary, but we also think that can be a really exciting experience because your career kind of turns into this ongoing, self-informed process of developing skills. So that's all I have for now. Thank you for your time. Thanks to our host, IFC, and the wonderful city of Cape Town, and look forward to chatting with you.